guys? Sorry, I think there was an issue with the password earlier on. That's why some of you weren't able to sign in. But yeah, I just corrected it. Hopefully, yeah, people get to sign in now. So how's everybody doing?
Just eat lunch, sir.
Oh, well, true, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, is Aaron already here? All right, Aaron is here. I think next time I'll just remove the password requirement so that most of you won't have issues. But hopefully by next week, we'll have the um, DLSU account ready so that we can use that instead. I think I can link it um, directly. Um, just checking if we have. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of emails about the Zoom link. All right, so we're about 9 in here right now. Maybe let's wait mm, about 4 more minutes. Hopefully people sign in. I'll just send a message using our dashboard so that people would know to sign in. We are about, okay, we're 19 in the room. Yeah, let's wait maybe a few more minutes. So at least we have like maybe half of the class here, and then we can begin. Good afternoon, Errol and Sari. All right, I think we have a good number of people. We have 27 currently in the room. Um, and then I'll quickly share screen so that we can start. Can you see my screen well?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. Uh, okay. So what do you see? Do you see the PowerPoint slide?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you had a good lunch. I do understand that this isn't the ideal time to conduct classes, no? Because usually after kumain, a lot of you guys would be quite sleepy. But hopefully we can have a productive session together, no? Um, to start our right, I'll just stop share real quick and check the groups now. To start off our session, let's have group one lead us with an opening prayer. So is anybody from group one here? Si Sean, Kayla, Stephen, Charles, or si Gabriel?
Hi, morning, sir. I can do it. I mean, afternoon.
All
Okay,
right, sure. Go ahead.
afternoon pala. Okay, I'll pray. Is it okay if I do a Christian prayer? I'm not.
Yep.
Okay. Let's pray, everyone.
Yeah.
Dear Lord, thank you for this wonderful day that you've given us. And thank you that you now give us the privilege of studying the subject of economics. Please allow my teacher, Bernard, to teach us properly, and please allow us as students to listen also as well. And may everything that we do be in accordance to your will. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
All right. So okay. So for today's session, no, and siguro since we had an asynchronous class now as a starting off point, it's a way for me to just organize and to sort of contextualize you guys on how we're approaching the course, no, in principle. Um, so like I said in the video, and hopefully most of you watched it before, we'll be doing asynchronous classes every Monday. And for the rest of the 11, 12 sessions we'll have. It's all going to be, essentially a video that I will upload every week, where I will have a short lecture on a particular economic concept that we'll have to encounter um, this term rather. Um, and at the same time, I will probably add a few additional like reading materials, some articles, as well as some videos, no, that are already available online. If you want to go deeper and learn more about that particular concept. So you'll have one required video to watch every Monday. And then you'll have like supplementary materials that you can access if you want to learn more. All right. Mondays are supposed to help you guys manage your own pace in terms of learning. No? So don't stress yourself too much. There's going to be a lot of materials I'll be posting in the module section, but only the video will be required for you guys to watch through. All right. So to contextualize our first lecture, no, for the semester, essentially it has the following. Started off with our prayer, and this will be um, a regular practice, at the start of every synchronous class. Um, and then for the rest of the topics that we'll be discussing today, we'll be covering quite a lot, no? And we'll be tackling them quite broadly. The purpose here isn't really for you guys to gain a mastery of everything that we'll discuss today, But the purpose really is to get you familiar with some of the language being used in economics. And the purpose behind that is obviously you'll be tackling, you know, articles, journal articles and magazine articles and books, no, that tackle these economic concepts and use these concepts as a way to express and sort of articulate certain ideas. So familiarizing yourself this early on will be essential, no? Para we're all essentially in the same wavelength, no, when we discuss these things. So, um, sorry, I'll go back. So there are four things that we'll go through for today's lecture. We'll have a brief discussion on what economics is, right? And a lot of you guys are quite familiar to this already, I assume, no? I think in senior high, as mentioned in the introductions discussion natin, no, that some of you guys were able to take an economics subject already, or like an introductory class to economics. So that's really good. But we'll have, I guess, a more philosophical discussion on what economics is, right? Our purpose isn't really for you guys to memorize something, but to appreciate economics not only as an idea, but as a lens to see the world, right? The second thing we'll be discussing are some basic principles of economics. And some of these things will be necessary for you guys to appreciate how economists think, right? How do they make sense of the world, and what are the basic things that they consider in terms of analyzing, you know, the complexities of human behavior, you know, particularly in accessing commodities. The third thing we'll be discussing are important decision pitfalls. So we want to look into how individuals generally make decisions and where the mistakes often lie, right? And we always see that as a way to sort of make sense, no, of how we can in fact improve decision making, which is to a certain extent a significant goal for economics. And the last thing that we'll be discussing will be just a quick run through of the key concepts that we've learned throughout the session. Okay, so let's jump right into it. So, you know, when you think about economics, you know, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Can anybody share what they normally, you know, think about when they hear the word economics? Anybody would do? All right, so I got Aaron in the chat group saying supply and demand. Yes, that's one of the core principles that we'll have to tackle throughout the semester. But you know, fundamentally, when we think about economics, at the root of it all is the human being. No, in principle, economics doesn't really happen outside of human experience, and to a certain extent, that presumes two things, right? That one, it involves a certain level of cognition wherein an individual makes decisions, you know, outside of their basal instincts, right? When you think of animals and how they interact, there really isn't anything that demands economic study, right? Because in principle, you know, if you act on, let's say, a basal desire, a basal need to, let's say, meet hunger, the calculus there is fairly simple, right? The interactions aren't quite as complicated. But because of man's cognition, no, the man's ability to sort of navigate the world, determine the best way to do things, and therefore creating a need for the individual to maximize their utility, that there arises a need to study economics. So we start off with that concept, no? Coming off of Alfred Marshall. He's a political economist based in Cambridge, who wrote sort of a seminal book, no, on economics back in back in 1890. And essentially, he said that there are two parts to studying economics, right? One, obviously, is a study of wealth, right? When we talk about supply and demand, to a certain extent, that arrives to the study of wealth, right? It's about creating a surplus and maximizing that surplus. But on the more important side, it is a study of man, right? And how man makes decisions. Um, right. And in the process of making those decisions, there are certain realities that man has to consider, right? That, at the end of the day, you don't necessarily have access to unlimited resources, but your wants, no, and your needs are the same. So the question there is that given a certain set of needs, right, given certain conditions, how does man now navigate his world in order to meet the needs or the wants that he has, right? So it's about understanding how choices are made within conditions of scarcity, right? If there are limited resources, how do I maximize the resources that I have in order to meet the needs that I have, right? Or in order to achieve the wants that I want, right? And another component to that, and surely how economics is largely appreciated nowadays, is that because of that need and because of the existence of scarcity, man needed a way to sort of rationalize how they would organize themselves in order to maximize those resources. So he created, in principle, a system of interaction, right? A system by which things are being produced and things are being consumed, no? And distributed. So it's a mix of all of those things. So again, sort of going back to Alfred Marshall's quote, no? He says that economics is better compared to the laws of tides, no, rather than the law of gravitation. It's because the interactions that we try to understand and appreciate are far more complex, no, and are far more uncertain than the simplicity of having an exact law. So this is one thing that we sort of need to impress on a lot of economists nowadays. See, economics is not an exact science. So it's not a natural science in the sense that um, the outcomes that you observe are undisputable. No, that in economics we do deal with numbers, but those numbers are abstractions of certain social realities that are far more complex than what we can actually truly understand about the world. So these are inexact and in some cases faulty, right? It's not a perfect science. Um, and sort of creating that distinction is essential, no, to make sure that we don't overstretch what we expect economics to actually deliver. That said, no, if it's an imperfect science, then why study it? What's the point of it all? No, why are you enrolled in my class today? Um, well, it's largely because there are various uses to economics that are quite pragmatic, right? They're not perfect, but they are in some ways essential, no, to making sure that um, um, we are able to sort of navigate the complexities of the world in a really efficient manner. So there are three main things as to why you should study economics. One, it gives you a set of tools and a lens from which you can look at the world. No? This is by no means the only lens or the only set of tools available to you. You will find out, no, as you sort of dive deeper into academic study, that economics is one way, right, to make sense of the complexities of the world. But in truth, all other disciplines make use of different lenses and different tools. And depending on your discipline, um, that will determine which tool or which lens you can use. Second, you see the world through trade-offs and learning to think through alternatives. So um, this perhaps is one of the most important things that you can get out of studying economics, right? Knowing full and well that for every decision that you make, that there is a cost to that decision. And sometimes those costs are implicit. Third is to understand how economics think and to argue against an economist. And I think this is probably the most important thing to learn through this course. No? Largely because you yeah. Sorry. Can anybody of you guys remind me at which point I was before I got cut out?
Where I think you were
Hello.
explaining how to understand how economists think and how to argue against an economist.
Yeah. All right. So okay naman. No? I got cut um, in the third sentence. So yeah. Like I said, you'll encounter economists on a day-to-day basis, and they're the only way that you can really, argue effectively against an economist. Wait, I'll just share the right screen. Yeah. So the only real way for you to argue effectively against an economist is if you have a certain level of understanding about how economics works, right? So you need to understand their lens in principle. By the way, no, for all of you guys, I do understand that it's quite frustrating if the internet suddenly cuts out like that. Um, I think sometimes the internet can be quite intermittent. So just in case that happens again, just stay in the room and I'll definitely come back. If I won't be able to come back to the meeting room, I'll just post a message on um, Animo Space, no? If that works out for you guys. Okay, so let's proceed now. So coming off of one of the main pillars no, of economic thought, um, John Maynard Keynes puts it really, really well, right? That the ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood, right? Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. So, in whatever profession you get into, whether you go to business or to government, whether you go to the academe, development work, whatever type of profession you want to do, you will encounter economists, right? And economists will have a really sort of privileged role, no, and position with how a lot of decisions are made. So understanding how economists think, understanding their language, and understanding the interactions as how they see it will be essential for you, because you can navigate essentially what they're saying more effectively. Now, again, not to get too carried away, um, at the end of the day, economists don't necessarily have the answer to everything. Yes, they have a lot of power and influence in determining how the world works. But at the same time, like I said earlier on, economics isn't a perfect science. So here are some really well-respected economists in the field throughout history, and each of them have something really important to say about the profession of economics. No? So Thomas Piketty, who's well known for his work on inequality, once said that economists tend to think that they are much smarter than historians, than everybody, and that is a bit too much, because at the end of the day, we don't know very much in economics. So in truth, no, even if economists are engaged in the activity of trying to understand the full complexities of human behavior, no, with how they sort of make decisions in terms of maximizing their utility, in truth, economists really don't understand everything about how the economy works. Um, I remember when I was in undergrad, my professor used to say that current existing models can maybe estimate up to 50% of economic behavior, but generally economic behavior is far too complex to sort of um, minimize or equate down into one formula. John Maynard Keynes once said that if economists can manage um, um, to get themselves thought as humble or competent people on a level with dentists, that would be splendid. And Gail Braith said that economics is extremely useful as a form of employment for economics, right? So it's a self-reinforcing profession to a certain extent. Um, Now, in going through this course, it's really about building a way for you guys to appreciate the world, right? It's giving you a way to answer complex questions and understand them outside of the face value of that question. So here are some of the questions that you'll be able to answer. So why do movie theaters give discounts to students and senior citizens, right? What's the logic behind that? And hint, it's not because they're nice people. They may be nice people, but that's not the main motivation, right? Um, you'll also you'll also be able to answer what's the best way to make housing affordable for the poor. Are monopolies always bad? And who wins and loses in international trade, right? And all of these are really like complex questions to go through in the root of it. All right. So I've been mentioning multiple times in many of my responses, as well as some of the points, this idea of the economic way of thinking. And what exactly does that mean? In principle, this is really about understanding that economics is a lens or a way of looking out into the world, right? It simplifies certain aspects of that world in order for you to make sense of how things operate. And at the core of that are certain principles that guide that way of thinking, right? And that's sort of what we will tackle throughout this course. Now, at the minimum, there are certain things that you need to understand, right? First, there's a difference within economics between macroeconomics and microeconomics. The simplest way we can put it is that microeconomics is simply the study of economic behavior of individuals and firms and markets for individual goods. So the best way to sort of make sense of this is that, when you think about microeconomics, it's about those individual choices, right? Understanding how goods will fare in a given market, right? Given certain persuasions or certain price signals. Macroeconomics, on the other end, is the study of aggregate economy. So you're looking at, how essentially an entire sort of economic system will work given certain persuasions, right? So here you will tackle issues on inflation, unemployment, and economic growth, the GDP, as a measure of that. Now, normally in the profession, microeconomics is seen to be far more scientific, right? In the sense that with microeconomics, there's far less speculation. You're dealing with concrete data, and all of these things are available to you, as a researcher. With macroeconomics, though, since it's dealing with the aggregate economy, it's much harder to get, um, you know, baseline, grounded data with how things operate. And a lot of the models used in macroeconomics are quite speculative in the sense that it expects a certain type of behavior and assumes a certain type of behavior amongst the individuals, or well, amongst the institutions that it tries to study. So that's why they find macroeconomics to be a little bit less scientific in that sense, right? But at the same time, no, we're using the term scientific when it comes to economics, but in truth, economics isn't necessarily, um, you know, a scientific endeavor. There are different types by which economics can be used, and there are different ways by which economics has been appreciated through the years. No, one important distinction is between this notion of positive economics versus normative economics. Now, if you go online, there's a lot of misinformation about how to dichotomize these two things. No, and it's really important for me to clarify that at this point. It's not a battle between two different types of economics, right? Um, it's merely how economists approach economics as a field or as a study. No, that makes that difference. So when we say positivist economics or positive economics, this essentially deals with how things are. No, it tries to explain the complexity of human behavior with how they interact within a market, and tries to sort of give empirical um, um, assumptions about how these interactions will transpire. No? So there's a predictive value to positivist economics. With positivist economics, you deal primarily with data, and you try to use that data to extrapolate how behavior will sort of mature over time, right? To which direction will that behavior move towards? No. Um, but the thing with positivist economics is that it assumes that there are certain fixed truths in the world, right? That there are certain aspects to human behavior that you can sort of whittle down to particular laws that you would apply, right? So one of the main cornerstones to positive economics is the idea that human beings are rational beings, so utility maximizers, which in principle is something that we can question. No? Moving on, the more we try to understand about the world, the more we realize that, well, people aren't necessarily as rational as we assume them to be. Normative economics, on the other hand, primarily talks about how things should be, right? So it's prescriptive in that sense. So it talks about an ideal state of how economic interactions need to happen, and sets a benchmark, no, for governments and firms to live up to. So if this is the ideal organization of how economic behavior should transpire, then we should all aspire to be, that particular type of producer or that particular type of consumer. So it comes at it from a rather different angle. The problem with normative economics, though, is that it is inherently subjective, right? So since it deals with norms, right, it's contextual to the country experience or the community experience that we're studying. So there are definitely like a lot of pros and cons between these two approaches to economics. We also sort of enter that space between a question of whether economics is an area dealing with science or is in itself a form of science, or whether or not it's largely policy, right? And to a certain extent, it's both. It's science in the sense that the underlying theories that drive economic practice assumes that there is truth that you can derive from observation, right? That's one of the core principles of scientific thought or scientific inquiry. But at the same time, economics really is useless if it's not built for policy, right? The purpose of economics to a certain extent is for you to make sense of the world in order to prescribe a certain set of actions for government to take or for private firms to take. You know? So it sort of teeters in both science and policy. And the last sort of distinction is between this principle of business studies and public administration versus economics or hard economics. And the main difference there being is that when it comes to business studies and public administration, it's very much applied. You try to make sense of the world through economics in order to apply it in certain conditions that would allow you to make optimal decisions. Economics is a pure science, on the other hand, and there are people who sort of deal with economics in this way, is more in terms of like theory building and model building. It's about creating a particular model that best captures or interprets the complexities of the world. No? And there are a lot of ways by which this is approached. No? In the 1970s and the 1980s, there's this aspiration to create a grand theory of economics, and that to a certain extent has been brought forth by early works of Keynes, in the 1940s, and a lot of political economists, all throughout Europe, in that era. In more recent history, the goal of creating a grand theory for things isn't really all that popular anymore. There's this idea of sort of incrementally understanding behavior or contextually understanding behavior, which is quite postmodernist, yes, but is sort of better fit to sort of understand and to capture the complexities of the world. We shouldn't avoid those complexities because those complexities are essential when we're making, good economic decisions. And we'll sort of get into that in more detail as we go along. Now, let's jump into the basic principles of economics. So since we have a general understanding of what economics is as an activity or as a field, we need to sort of dive into and understand what drives economic thought, right? What are the main things that individuals who call themselves economists use in order to appreciate the world that they're trying to explain or interpret. The first principle that we're going to talk about is called the scarcity principle. And in truth, it's fairly simple. The scarcity principle comes from the assumption that the world is made of a limited number of resources, right? That in principle, there isn't unlimited resources. And since there isn't unlimited resources, it necessitates choice as a requisite with how you interact within a market, right? We can't do everything that we want. So, for example, today for this class, we have about 2 hours and a half to discuss a lot of things, right? within that 2 hour and a half class, um, ideally, I'd like to cover, let's say, 100 pages worth of content. But since time is limited and there's only, a short amount of time for me to actually speak and discuss this with you guys, choice at the same time needs to be made with what I actually include in the slides and what I take out, right? So choice is a natural part of how we deal with day-to-day things, right? And understanding that in the process of making those choices, we're making those choices because we acknowledge that there is a scarcity that we have to deal with. The second thing that we need to understand about the scarcity principle is the notion of trade-offs, right? That we essentially have to give up one thing in order to get another. And in the process, we must choose what is best. So for me, let's say in the process of me, going to this class and doing this lecture, um, what my trade-off is, let's say, would probably be, I don't know, like watching a Netflix movie or like, playing a game for 2 hours or going out to eat or, any of that. So in the process of me making that decision, I need to let go of all of those other things in order for me to do this one thing, right? Now, without scarcity, well, there is no economics, right? If, let's say, you have unlimited space and time and resources, then there's really no need to make choices, right? If you can do 10 things at the same time, then there's no real point in choosing one over the other. Just do all of the 10 things, right? So understanding that scarcity is at the core of economics is essential. Um, so, think about it in this way. Let's say, uh, you know, think about the class size for an example. So a smaller class size, let's say if we have like 10 or 15 people in this class, is better for the students who can take it, right? Mainly because it's a more intimate with the professor. You can ask questions more freely, but um, professors are scarce, right? There's not a whole lot of people who can teach these concepts. So because of that, students will essentially have to sacrifice more of other things. In this sense, um, the money that you pay for tuition to essentially get the attention of professors. So the idea there is that if you want a smaller class size, the cost of education needs to be higher in order to pull more professors in, right? And sort of encourage them or entice them to teach. Um, if we want to sort of reduce the cost of that education, well, class sizes will have to be larger, right? Otherwise, you won't have enough teachers to teach all of those classes. Okay, so that's the scarcity principle in a nutshell. Next, we have there the cost benefit principle. Did I go two slides? No. The cost benefit principle. So the cost benefit principle, on the other hand, is the idea that an individual or firm or a society should take action if and only if the extra benefits from taking that action are at least as great as the extra cost, right? And I know this sounds like a really complicated sentence, but sort of in layman's terms, no, it's just about um, calculating whether the next step you take is worth the benefits of taking that next step, right? Or are my current actions worth the benefits that I will get out of it? We'll sort of get into sort of marginal benefit and marginal cost in more detail as we go along. But essentially, the point I'm getting at here is the idea that it's an internal calculus, right? It's you weighing between the cost of something and the benefit that you get out of it, right? Um, at the core of the cost benefit principle is the notion of opportunity costs, right? And the idea here is that the costs to certain things aren't always explicit, right? Oftentimes, when you decide to do something, right, if you decide to buy something, you're using that money not to get something else, right? So in principle, there's a cost to you spending, for a certain commodity that isn't just the amount of money you paid. And this is the idea of the value of the next best alternative. And you essentially forgo that alternative in the process of selecting one choice over the other, right? At the root of that is the principle of explicit and implicit costs, right? So explicit cost is the money that you spend. Let's say, I'll give you guys an example. So if let's say you have like 1,500 pesos today, right? And you spend that money, you can either spend that money to, buy an expensive lunch in a really, in a medium range, good restaurant, um, or you can spend that money to buy a book. It's an example. So in the process of you, you know, going out to dinner, in principle, you're foregoing getting the enjoyment you get out of buying and reading that book, right? So that is your implicit cost, right? Is that clear with everyone? Before I proceed, any questions so far, by the way? All right, I'll proceed then. So now, in understanding the cost-benefit principle, at the root of it is the idea of incentives. And incentives, as a principle, matters into how we understand and appreciate human behavior. People take account the costs and benefits of different actions. So therefore, if there's more benefit to the cost, um, they're more likely to do that thing, right? So if you incentivize an individual, if you design the system to incentivize an individual to do one thing, the assumption is that they're more likely to do that thing you want them to do. So going back to our earlier example, if let's say I make the book free, right, versus spending the 1,500 pesos for the book, there's a larger group of people who would likely get the book, right? Because you rearrange the incentives a certain way. Now, understanding how people take action is at the root of economic study, right? Or at least at the root of sort of how applied economics is appreciated. The idea here is that what we're trying to learn isn't just a way to interpret the world, but rather a way to engage with it, right? And how do I design, let's say, my business, or how do I design my government in such a way that I encourage people towards behavior that I would want them to have, right? How do I build incentives to encourage people to act a certain way? And that's sort of the main idea behind the applied value of the cost benefit principle. Now, when we think about choice models and sort of how economics works, in the real world, it's actually an aggregate, of these principles. It's both taking the scarcity principle, understanding that people have limited budgets and that they have to rationalize how they spend that budget in order to maximize their own utilities, and at the same time the cost benefit principle, that people respond to prices and to incentives. And if you adjust your incentives a certain way, then you can encourage people to act a certain way as well. Right. At the root of this is the idea that people are rational maximizers of self-interest, that they will always act to their own self-interest in order to sort of maximize the utility of a particular good, or to improve their situation as much as they can. This doesn't necessarily hold in all situations. And when you take it outside of that abstraction, you'll find out that people aren't always quite rational. But it's a good starting point. No? What we need to understand is that a basic economic choice model in principle is an abstraction. No? It's a simplification of the complexities of human behavior. So it doesn't try to explain everything, but it tries to say that given a certain set of assumptions, then this is how we can expect people to act or behave, and that can be quite useful in terms of how you build policy or how you build your business. Now, at the core of neoclassical economics is this notion of rationality, and that people essentially make consistent decisions to do what they want. No? That they will always act towards their interest, and that interest is fairly uniform because they undergo this complex process of weighing benefits and costs. Right? Um, at the level of individual behavior, economists usually are not trying to determine if someone wants or desires is good or bad. No? It's not normative in that sense. What it tries to understand is how people would make those decisions. So in principle, it's a behavioral model in that sense. Yeah. Now, in trying to understand the model, right? When you sort of think about it, um, hey guys, apologies for getting cut again. Just a quick before we go back to the lecture note. Just a quick checkup on everyone. How's my audio with you guys? Can you hear me well, or does it get cut
Yes,
off
sir.
as well?
It's okay naman.
Okay
It's
naman
okay,
po.
sir.
It's okay, naman.
Yes.
I just get I just keep getting cut, no? Anyway, what was the last thing that I was discussing right before I got cut? Just so that I know where to start off.
Economic models po.
Okay. Sige, sige. All right. All right. So, like I said earlier on, no, economic models by design is a simplification of reality. Right? It doesn't try to explain the entirety of that reality, especially when you sort of start looking into, um, these regression models. May certain disclaimers. There are certain disclaimers there, which state that it explains a certain aspect of human behavior, but it doesn't try to encapsulate the entirety, um, even within the assumptions and the context of the model being used. Um, One way to look at it is, think of the model as a map. You know? So like when you look at Google Earth and then you see images of um, the Philippines, and then what you try to do is you look for the fastest way from, let's say, Quezon City to Manila. um, the map that you're looking at doesn't necessarily look at every nook and cranny, every single street, the vendors selling at which corner, every single building. Right? It doesn't look at all of those individual details. It simplifies that picture and shows you what's the most essential parts in order for you to arrive to your destination, right? So when you think about it, um, it marks off the location where you're at, the location where you want to go to, and maps out the ideal paths, and only gives you the information on which particular streets or roads to take, as well as how long it would take you to go from point A to point B. That map, to a certain extent, is a model of the real world, right? It's a simplification of the complexities of the city streets of Metro Manila. Does it make it not useful because you're not looking at all of those individual details? Not necessarily, right? The utility is still there. You're still able to get really important and good information from it, but you're not necessarily making use of all of the information available to you in order to arrive to that. So there's a certain usefulness intrinsic to economic models. Um, and one of the main things that we have to understand, and I really want to impress this on to all of you guys, is that it doesn't explain everything, and it doesn't try. Okay? Now, let's get into some important decision pitfalls, right? And these are things that people make a lot of mistakes about in terms of not only, in terms of appreciating economic material, but as well as how you make decisions, in your day-to-day lives, right? And these things are things that economists understand, but at the same time, these are things that they try to grapple with and sort of make sense of, in the process of outlining economic behavior. So, um, when we think about the core assumption that people aren't always rational, well, at the end of, at the end of the day, economists know for a fact that most of everyone isn't in fact rational. Um, and as economics progressed over the years, they slowly started to incorporate the irrationality of humans in their economic models. So there are three important economists working in the space: Daniel Kahneman, Robert Frank, and Richard Thaler. Richard Thaler recently won the Nobel Prize for Economics about 2 years ago, if I remember correctly. And it's essentially referring to this whole new branch of economics called behavioral economics. And it's a really cool space, no? Um, that people are getting into. And here, what it tries to sort of make sense of is that there's an inherent uncertainty to human behavior that we need to consider. and that we can gain a better understanding of this uncertainty if we actually go down and try to study human behavior and understand how those interactions will relate to a particular decision, no, in the perspective of an individual. So um, there's an important juncture here between psychology and economics, right? Since I mentioned earlier on, no, economics is in principle a study of man. Understanding how man thinks is an essential part of that, right? We won't fully sort of tackle um, this particular branch of economics in this course, no? Not as intently as um, we probably should, um, largely because this by design is an appreciation course. So um, you need to have a good understanding of the basics, assuming ceteris paribus, or all things the same, no, as a starting off point, and then from there we can sort of build on and try to explain a larger share of the world, right? So as you go and progress through your economics courses, you'll probably be able to tackle a lot of these more complex ideas being presented by Thaler, Frank, and Kahneman. I would recommend, though, if you're really interested in this space, to read Richard Taylor's book, Nudge Theory, rather. It's a really, really good book to start off of when you want to appreciate behavioral economics. The second pitfall that we need to talk about is ignoring opportunity costs, right? And the thing with opportunity costs is that a lot of the times, how we make decisions often only rely on an understanding of the implicit costs. So, when you think about studying at university, so like, you being freshman, second year, third year students in ULSU, most of the time, the only cost that you're really looking at is the tuition fee, right? The price of studying in the LSU. And to a certain extent, yes, it is a cost that you need to consider, and it is an important cost to consider, right, in the process of making that decision. But in truth, there are actually a lot of implicit costs associated with you studying in the LSU, right? Things like the value of your time, the cost of renting, or well, now it's not a cost anymore, for a lot of you guys. But back when we had face-to-face classes, the cost of renting a house nearby, the mental stress and anguish that you'll have to go through to work on your assessments. All of these things are costs that you have to pay in order to study in the LSU, right? When you think about it, right now you're spending 2.5 hours to listen to this lecture, to attend your virtual classes online, and this is time that you can potentially spend on other things, right? So I remember one of you guys had a business of like buying and selling things online, and that 2.5 hours could mean some level of profit for you if you decide to do that instead of attending this class, right? So it's a value judgment to a certain extent on what on where you would find the most amount of utility, right? If you find more value in attending this class than the amount of money you can potentially earn, buying and selling things online, then you make the decision to sort of attend the class instead, right? But know full and well, in effect, that the cost of attending this lecture isn't just the amount of money you spend, but also the um, the time lost, right, as an implicit cost. The third pitfall that we need to consider, and something that if there's one of the main things that I'd want you guys to sort of get a grasp of through this course, is to not ignore sunk costs, right? Sunk costs are costs when you can no longer, sunk costs are costs which you can no longer avoid or recover by taking a particular action, right? So let's say, In this case, you already, for some of you guys, you already paid your tuition fees. The idea of, and let's say, later on in the course, you don't find value in attending the classes anymore or finishing the course. You staying on to the course shouldn't be dictated by the cost or the tuition fee you have to pay, right, in order to attend. The decisions that you need to make, and we'll go into this in more detail, should be based on the utility, the benefits you get or the utility you get with the next set of lectures or with the next set of classes that you will be attending. Right. You know, in principle, the best way to sort of sum this up is that, there's no use crying over spilled milk. If the milk is already spilled, you can't really put it back in the glass, right, and expect it to be the same thing. So the best way to sort of deal with those types of situations is just to avoid it altogether and to make decisions based on the next benefit that you'll get, right? Yeah, so like I said, some of the examples of not ignoring sunk costs would be, let's say, switching to a major career or degree, buying a ticket to a concert or throwing good money after that. So let's say if you're already 2 years into a particular course and you find that, this is really, the appropriate career that I want to pursue, let's say I'm taking engineering and then, after 2 years, I realize, I'm really, really in love with philosophy. You shouldn't use the 2 years that you've spent studying engineering as a reason for you not to pursue philosophy, right? Because the marginal benefit that you would get from pursuing philosophy is much, much greater than staying in the course, right? It's the same thing with like tickets to a concert. So let's say you buy a ticket to a concert in advance, you buy it 6 months, before the actual concert, and then a week before the concert, you find out that, the weather is bad. And because of that, they moved the date of a concert to a day that you can't attend anymore, right? You not attending that concert isn't a loss, right? Even if you paid for the ticket already. Largely because the cost of the ticket is something that you can't recover anymore, right? You already paid for the ticket, it's done, right? You can't take that back. But, if you can't attend the new date, right, what is the cost of that? And that is a more important consideration in making that calculus. I guess one of the worst things that you can do, and this is pretty common in business, is the idea of throwing good money after bad. If you're seeing that a particular project is failing, let's say, you invested yourself in a particular business, the business has been going on for 10, 15 years, it's not hitting the right market, it's not really doing all that well, then if your immediate impulse is to pour more money in to try to make it work, that might not necessarily be the best decision to make, right? So understanding that, you essentially need to sort of recognize that the amount of money you spend to make that business work at the start is money already spent. So, throwing more money in when you know for a fact that it's not going to work, or there is no evidence to say that it is going to work, is actually just throwing good money away, right? And the last decision pitfall, and to a certain extent we've touched upon it in the earlier discussion, is not using marginal costs and marginal benefits. We'll go into more detail on MCs and MBs later on in the course, but in principle, this is just the idea that you need to look at the next set of costs and the next set of benefits you'll have to pay and you'll receive with the next additional unit of an activity. So marginal benefit is the increase in benefit that results from, carrying out one additional unit of activity, while marginal cost is the increase in total costs that result from carrying out one additional unit of activity, right? What we try to achieve is this notion of efficient allocation, right? You want to make sure that um, the amount of benefits you get is somewhat equivalent to the amount of benefits you spend, the amount of costs that you pay for, or the amount of money you spend. But you need to look at it in the margins, right? And appreciate that the goal really is to make sure that the next marginal benefit you get is at the very least equivalent to the marginal cost of that thing, right? So in principle, one good example, let's say, is if you want to eat in a buffet, right? So let's say, you get a box of pizza, there are 8 slices. You eat the first slice, you're satisfied, but you want more. You eat the second slice, you're satisfied, a little bit full, but you can still eat more. You eat the third slice, you're feeling really full now. You eat the fourth slice, and you're already full, and you feel satisfied. If you eat the fifth slice, you'll get a tummy ache, right? So at that point, the fourth slice is the best slice to stop already, right? Um, and eating the fifth slice will actually reduce the amount of benefits you get from eating the pizza, right? In a, let's say, all-you-can-eat buffet. So that's sort of the underlying idea of marginal cost and marginal benefits. And like I said, we'll go into more detail about this later on. Let's do a quick exercise for you guys. No? And we'll just do this in plenary. Later on, we'll have a breakaway session real quick, if we can. But let's use this as an example. No? Let's say we want to conduct, we're a pharmaceutical company, and we want to conduct clinical trials for a particular drug. For each clinical trial we make, we find a new use for that drug, right? And we increase its market value over time, right? So of the 5 clinical trials we can potentially make, for each clinical trial we need to spend $5 million. What do you think is the optimal number of trials that we should do to get the most amount of benefits out of conducting those trials? So have a think about it, and anybody can recite your answer. Do I have any takers who would want to guess what is the optimal number of trials in this example? Come on, guys.
2, sir.
I think why do you think it's 2 trials?
Because the difference between average benefit and sir.
Yep, go ahead.
The difference between the average benefit and the marginal benefit is still greater than the
Okay. So, remember earlier on, yep, sorry, go ahead.
no, you can go on.
So remember earlier on, yeah, all right. Remember earlier on, going back just a couple of slides, what we're trying to do is to make sure that what we're trying to find is here, right? Where marginal benefit reaches marginal cost, right? Wherein the marginal benefit at the very least should be equal to the marginal cost. So going back to the example, what do you think, at which point is the marginal benefit of doing a clinical trial is closest to the marginal cost? So if the marginal cost is about $5 million, How many trials do you think? So,
Sir, I think it's
all right,
one trial.
one trial. So let's look at it, right? So if you do one trial, you get $20 million for that trial, right? You get a market value of $20 million. So $20 million relative to 5 million cost is good, right? You get a profit of about 15 million, right? So yes, one trial is really, really good. Now, let's say you do a second trial, right? If you do a second trial, you'll get a benefit, a marginal benefit of 15 million, right? So if you do a second trial, you'll ramp up your profits to about um, 25 million, right? Because you got 15 million in the first trial, and then if you do a second trial, you'll get an additional 10 million, right? So um, 15 minus 5 is 10, right? So at the end of the day, that's still really good, right? If you do a third trial, you'll still get 4 million profit, right? Because you only spent 5 million to conduct that trial, but you earned um, an additional 4 million, no? From conducting that trial. So again, you still profit. And then your total profits at this point is about 29 million. If you do a fourth trial, you spend 5 million, but you only get 4 million marginal benefit. So here, your marginal benefit is lower than your marginal cost. So you actually spend more to get less benefits. So in this particular example, the optimal number of clinical trials is actually 3, right? Because if you conduct up to 3 trials, you're still profiting from that process. Is that clear with everyone?
Yes, sir.
So,
Yes, sir.
Yes.
um, so that's sort of where marginal benefit and marginal cost thinking, thinking at the margin, becomes important because when you think about it, you're still earning something, no? As you conduct more trials. You're earning 4 million by the fourth trial, and you're earning 2 million by the fifth trial. But in principle, you're actually losing money because you're spending more to conduct those trials, and you're not, creating returns for it. So this is what thinking in the margins is all about: understanding what the marginal cost is relative to the marginal benefit. All right. So I'm just wary of the time, no? Because I don't want you guys to sort of miss your next class if you have it. Okay, so some conclusions. Look at all the costs, which your choices can change, but do not look at the sunk costs. No, so don't think of it. Don't accumulate the costs that you spend. Just look at the marginal costs. And like I mentioned, second, look only at the marginal effects of those choices, right? Now, here are some key concepts that we went through, and these are essential things that you need to get a grasp of in order to do well in this course. We talked about opportunity costs quite extensively. We dichotomized between micro and macroeconomics, households versus aggregate economy, positive and normative economics, how things are versus how things should be, marginal benefit and marginal costs, and we've gone through average and marginal costs a bit, but not extensively. And lastly, the idea of sunk costs, right? And why we try to avoid it. Okay. So at this point, are there any questions so far? I do understand it's a lot of information now, to go through in your first day. But at the same time, I'm not expecting you guys to fully grasp everything. We'll go through all of these concepts in more detail as we go along the course. No? But I just wanted to introduce these ideas to you guys. Any questions from, I think, about the chat. Oh, no question from Gab.
Yes, sir.
How about you guys?
I have a question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So for the book that you gave? Will we be using that book for the entire course? I think the
No,
ManQs. Oh,
actually,
okay, okay.
for the yeah, the ManQ, I only required it for day one, and the only thing you really need to read there was chapters 1 and 2, pages 1 to 45. Um, but it's a really good resource, by the way. It's a seminal resource that a lot of economists use not to contextualize economic thought. Um, for the remaining sessions, we'll still be using ManQ for the theories and stuff, but I'll essentially translate it into lectures so that it will be easier for you guys to digest. But you can use the book as reference. In terms of the required readings, have you guys accessed our syllabus yet? There's a PDF copy of the syllabus uploaded in the syllabus section of Animo Space. Um, in the syllabus there, if you look at the learning plan, there's a list of readings per week um, that you'll have to go through. So those readings are things that you can search for yourself online, but I'll try to source them and upload them so that it's easier for you guys. Um, yeah, it is Mankiew's Principles of Economics, and I uploaded the book I think in week 1 of in the modules. Um, I will be sending the recording and I'll be posting it on Anima Space as well. And the PowerPoint is already up. So if you go to the module section, always check the module section. If you go to the module section of the course, I'm not sure if I published it though. I'll double check. I already uploaded it yesterday. Um, but yeah, I'll double check. I may not have I may not have published it yet. Okay. We're running a bit out of time, but there was some reflection. There was supposed to be a reflection exercise that we were gonna do. Um, but I guess it's more important for me right now to, uh, give this time for any questions that you guys might have for the class. So I'd like you guys to just think about these questions and try to apply some of the ideas in terms of, making sense of a lot of these things. So, what are the costs of attending this online class? What are the benefits you get from attending today's Zoom lecture? And if I ask the class to extend for another 10 minutes, would you stay online and why not, right? What are the costs to extending, the 10 minutes? So reflect on these things, try to think about it in your own time, and we'll try to go back to this when we go to the next class lecture. All right. Again, I'm being mindful of the time. I only have 4 minutes left with you guys, so I'll breeze through the next few slides. If you have questions, additional questions, just send me a message through Anima Space. I try to reply immediately. If I don't, please give me a maximum of 2 days to reply. But in any case, I'll try to reply as fast as I can. Just a few pointers for the group presentation because group 1 will be presenting next Wednesday already. The presentation should be no more than 20 minutes long. And at a minimum, it needs to have these 3 parts. So like my presentation, it has a title slide, obviously, a slide with the list of the group members. And this is usually for my use in terms of marking you guys, and a table of content. So a listing of what it is that you want to discuss. You can design however which way you want to present your reading, your selected reading. You can you can make use of activities, videos. You have free reign with how you want to approach it. So I'm perfectly happy with doing whatever it is that you want to do. And also you can refer to other materials to supplement your points or your arguments. You don't have to, you won't be graded for it. But if it enriches the discussion, I'm all for it. You can do that if you want to. Some admin stuff that we have to go through. Each group, so most of you guys have groups already, if I remember correctly. I think yes. I need for you guys to check on the people section of Anima Space. And I need at least one of you guys whoever the group leader is. So I need you guys to assign a group leader first and foremost, and for each leader to send me a message through Anonymous Space on Friday to indicate which article you would want to report on. The list of articles is provided in the syllabus. So definitely go through the syllabus. If you look at the learning plan part of the PDF file of the syllabus, you'll get a list of the readings. I'll be adding a different reading for group one after the class. So I'll upload that later today. Largely because Dr. Tulyao's article is currently hard to source. I think they pulled it out of online access. So it might be tough for you guys to look for it. So I'll be putting a different source for that. Number three, those who were not able to sign up for groups by 4 p.m. today will be automatically assigned to one. So if you haven't signed up for a group yet, make sure that you sign up for a group that you want to be a part of. And every Wednesday, we'll essentially follow this particular step-by-step process for our classes. We'll start with the prayer. I'll give a brief into the readings, excuse me. We'll have the 20-minute group presentation, a 10-minute open forum for any questions, and then we'll have a breakaway session every meeting for reflections. And then after that, we'll go back to the main plenary session and just have a sharing of what you were able to discuss during the breakaway session. And lastly, some week two reminders. Expect a video lecture on Monday on trade-offs. So this is us really starting to dive into these concepts more, and we'll be focusing on trade-offs for Monday. Watch the video and do the assigned tasks. I'll be putting out announcements on Anima Space. By the way, as a general question to the class, is Anima Space working for you guys? Or would you prefer a different means of contact, either through FB, Viber, or Telegram? What do you guys think?
Animal space is okay.
No issues with Anima Space?
Nope.
Okay. How about the rest? Is there anybody who has an issue with using Anima Space as their main means of contact? Okay. So we'll be essentially using Anima Space for the most part, if that's the case. Wait, there's a chat message. Okay. So group one will be reporting next Wednesday, so be prepared. Group two will be in charge of the prayer next week. So check again the people section under groups to see which group you're in and whether you'll be in charge of the prayer next week or whether or not you'll be reporting. So again, any questions so far? I'm assuming there are none. All right, so with that, yeah, we're ending our first class on FTNE Econ on thinking like an economist, right? So I do understand that it might be particularly heavy for some of you guys as a starting off lecture. Again, don't be intimidated, don't be stressed out. We are essentially, we're just making sure that we cover all the basics and that we have a general understanding of the concepts to start off of. I'm not expecting you guys to fully understand everything, and we'll go with all of these little things that I discussed in more detail as we go along. All right. Okay, so with that, guys, we are ending day one. Hopefully you got something out of this lecture, and see you guys again, well, on Monday virtually, asynchronously, and on Wednesday through a different Zoom account. Hopefully the LaSalle Zoom account will be available. All right, see you guys and have a good day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.